while waiting, I could tell you that actually it says in the program that I'm from the insurance company called Tryg, and that is true that I'm Nordic Director of Corporate Social Responsibility in the insurance company. But actually I took my slides here from another position I have. I'm chairing the Danish Council for Digital Security, which is a council that was established just half a year ago. We are working with safe use of IT in Denmark. My background is in human rights, but I've been working with a combination of IT and human rights, especially privacy protection, since the beginning of the 90s. What I'm going to do here today is talk a little bit about the context that we should see and perceive the DESSI project within. As you can see from the program, the three cases that will be explained here have to do with physical protection. So it's about courthouses, protection of courthouses. It's about protection of bus drivers, and it's about search and rescue of persons by the means of drones in Norway. But what is actually the case right now, as you already know, is that the highest on the agenda, on top of the agenda in the European security policy program is the focus of the internet. So it's about cybersecurity. And that's where I take my point of departure and then make perspectives into the DESSI project at the end of my speech. What we see right now is an immense increase in the number of cyber attacks. We have had recently huge attacks here in Denmark, and we experience that every day throughout the world. Also, there is an increase in the number of cyber crimes. It's much easier to conduct cyber crimes as it is today. The whole area has been professionalized, so we have organized crimes on the internet as well as in the analog world. Another issue, and that's where drones are also important, is that what we see right now is a tendency to introduce cyber warfare. It may replace conventional warfare, not completely I think, but it will be a supplement to the way of warfare that we know from the past century and from the first years of this. So I think it's important also to be aware of that, and especially remembering, and our visitors around here can help us with that, remembering the principles and values in democratic societies. What is characteristic for this whole area is that we have an impact of cyber activities, cyber attacks, cyber crime, cyber war, that goes across the borders. It's no longer just within a country or between two countries. It reaches everything and everywhere, and there is especially a potential risk for the whole infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, encompassing both the energy sector, the telecom sector, electricity plants, and so forth. So we have this huge vulnerability in our society today, because it's so easy actually to attack and destroy important units within our societies. Also, what is characterizing the whole security policy agenda is that EU, US, and national governments are aware of the effects of cyber activity, and especially attacks and crimes, on both citizens, consumers, nations, organizations, and businesses. It has an immense impact. It's extremely expensive for companies that are attacked by hackers. It's also detrimental to the life of people who are the victims of identity theft and other ways of meeting criminal activities when living in cyberspace and using cyberspace on a daily basis. If we look at the number of attacks, I just found this one in the latest issue of The Economist, and it shows that we have 2,800 DDoS attacks each day, and these attacks are digital denial of service attacks, where you have it's kind of, as you can see here, it's a flotsam nuisance traffic. So you had a lot of pings going into the system and laying the system down, so they cannot really function. And this has an immense impact. We cannot. It can crash our websites. It can make an impediment or make it impossible actually to go out online and offline. We're unable to send emails, and if the banks will be unable to service their customers, governments will be unable to run their countries. So this is really serious and a serious threat to the whole world. And as you can see, it's increasing, going back to 2009 and up till now. It has increased immensely. So if we look at the surveillance of citizens, what we also experience in these years is that we see a lot more surveillance of citizens than ever before. And I may be influenced very much by the fact that I think Denmark is the country in the world where we have most personal data registered on each citizen with public administration agencies. So it's part of our daily life in Denmark that we have data. So it is actually possible for public administration authorities to create very detailed profiles of each citizen. I don't think we see it anywhere else in the world that we have this huge amount of data on each person. But that's not the only thing. What is more critical perhaps is that we see a lot of surveillance of the critical infrastructure by the national CERT agencies, which is the computer emergency response teams. They survey the internet, and of course the purpose is to avoid attacks. But at the same time, you have to strike a balance, because they'll get access also to a lot of information that are critical to businesses, that are critical to persons and so forth. But there's an increase in that kind of surveillance. Also, as we saw just a few weeks ago, the whole NSA case and Snowden coming out with information about surveillance by the National Intelligence Service agencies is increasing. And actually, we do not know how much is done in by the European intelligence services to survey content and traffic on the internet, and especially the social media, our browsers, and so forth. Another thing that was introduced in Europe within the EU after 9/11 was the registration of tele and data traffic, so that all telecommunication providers are now obliged to register information about our traffic on the internet, our mobile traffic, the numbers that we call to and from, what time we do it, and who we call. So there is definitely an increase in the level of surveillance that we haven't really experienced before in the world. In one of the newspapers this morning, it was one of these free newspapers called Metro Express. They made a survey among citizens in Copenhagen, and the result was that 44 are willing to accept surveillance of the internet. So this is not the surveillance or the registration of data, traffic data. It's actually the surveillance made by national intelligence services. So that's a huge part of the population who is actually willing to have the police looking over their shoulders and see what they are doing, which is, I think, appalling from a democratic perspective. In contrast, we see that the citizens in the US were opposing the surveillance made by NSA, and we also have similar responses in Germany and in the UK, in the Netherlands, throughout Europe. I think we may be the only country within the EU where the citizens are so willing to accept the new surveillance schemes. Having said that, it's interesting to see what has the responses been by the EU. The EU came out here in the beginning of the year with a new Cybersecurity Strategy, and the purpose of that is to create an open, safe, and secure cyberspace. It takes a point of departure also in the need for more protection because of the increase in cyber attacks and cyber crimes. But also, and that is extremely important, and as you will experience later, this has also been built into the DESSI program. That what the EU does here is that they say we have to investigate, we have to prevent attacks, but at the same time we have to protect fundamental rights. It's a crucial importance that we adapt our values and principles in the democracy, our fundamental rights, that we adapt that to the virtual world also. And I think that's a very important thing to stress, that it's not, we have left the whole discussion of balancing security and protection of fundamental rights, and how they have to go hand in hand. And that kind of integrating the whole idea of privacy, freedom of expression, good governance, the right to a remedy, is extremely important for the whole understanding of creating safe IT environments and a safe cyberspace. Also, they stress that we cannot lift this task without working together. So it's important that we create trust and confidence between not only states but also among private and public actors. And they add that the cooperation between different policy areas is also important. And that is, of course, because of the nature of the internet and the nature of the tools that the internet gives us, that we have to address cybersecurity, and protection of fundamental rights in each policy area within the EU, not only as part of a security policy. The priorities within the strategy is to achieve cyber resilience, it's to reduce cybercrime as one of the purposes, and it's to develop a cyber defense policy, which is interesting because what we do here is actually that we create a link to the military interest in a cyber security policy. So you combine the civilian purpose with the military purpose. I'll come back to that in a little while. And also the strategy addresses the need for developing industrial and technological resources for cybersecurity. And again, as you can see here in the last bullet, that it's important that we have the ability to promote EU values when setting up this coordination mechanisms between the policy of cyberspace and military interests. Another initiative by the EU was taking, together with the presentation of the cybersecurity strategy, namely the proposal for a directive on network and information security, and the NIS directive. The proposed NIS directive lays down some measures here that oblige the states to set up a strategy, designate a national NIS authority. And the NIS authority is extremely important because that is the one that will ensure that we have a civil path and a military path, and that each authority will pursue the interest in the different areas. So they are not combined, or they are not intertwined. So the idea is to work together with the existing CERTs, the computer emergency response teams, but also to create these independent NIS authorities that can look into, for instance, the critical infrastructures and set up plans to accommodate the vulnerabilities of these critical infrastructures. If we look at that's the security path. If we then look at the protection of personal data path, then we have a pending proposal for an EU regulation on personal data. This is really a new thing within the EU. We have had the directive on personal data since '95. And now what is proposed is a regulation, meaning that we'll have, it's really pushing forward and strengthening the protection of the fundamental right to privacy and personal data by using this tool of regulation instead of directive. It's very much under pressure. The proposal, there's been a lot of lobbying, both from businesses but also from governments who are not interested in this very strong protection of the citizens because it imposes obligations on companies, for instance, and on public authorities that are not really interesting from an economic perspective. But as it is now, we have a very consistent agenda, I think, for protecting both, going into the security issues and also addressing the need for the citizens to maintain their protection of personal data. The last thing I'll mention is this issue about cyber war. What we do see is that we have cyber actions and cyber attacks against nations and the administration. There was an attack on Iran, the Ddos attack, and that was initiated by the U.S. and some say it was supported by China. It's alleged. What is that? It hasn't been confirmed that is the case. But at least there was this attack which had an enormous impact on Iran. And that kind of attack, we'll probably see more of that. We'll probably also see it in combination with the use of drones for military purposes. The problem in this area, if we see more of DDoS attacks and computer viruses and spying and infiltration for the purpose for military purposes, then we have to start asking ourselves, what is the regulation here? We have international regulation for chemical war, for biological war, but we do not have any regulation concerning cyber war. So this is a new area where we really have to dive into and see what is it that we have to do in order to maintain and enhance the level of protection of the citizens. And I think in that regard we can learn a lot from the way that the EU has addressed issues of security and data protection within the EU context. And some of the cyber war issues are actually covered by the new cybersecurity strategy. From my perspective, the problem is that it's not that we start to integrating military purposes and civilian purposes within one strategy instead of keeping them apart. So what are the perspectives on this when we look at the DESSI project? I think that the DESSI project is definitely a front-runner project in the sense that it has taken into the consideration already from the start that this idea of security and data protection going hand in hand. So it's a very good example of privacy by design. That privacy and protection of fundamental rights is actually integrated in the whole thinking of establishing effective security. So in that way, it's in the forefront. It's actually a good case showing that it is possible to do what is laid down in the EU strategy on the overall security policy scheme. And that I think is extremely valuable, both to show as a case, but also the tool itself will actually help people start working with this perspective and achieving, I hope, both security and privacy at the same time. So I'm very much looking forward to hear more of about the project and try to use it in the afternoon. Thank you very much.